Okay, so good afternoon, good evening, everybody, and we'll continue our journey through the AlephBet. More than halfway through, we're on the letter Samech, and let's jump straight into it. As usual, we'll start with a quick review of the letters that we've learned till now, and because we've done so many, I've had to split it into 2 slides, but we'll go through them quickly. So the first 5 letters are one group, AlephBet Gimel Dalet Hey, and this is the process of how Hashem's affluence comes from Hashem to us in this world. It starts with the Aleph. The Aleph is the Echad, one God. It's also the Aleph of Elokim, that's the source of everything. The next stage is to go to the Bet, which stands for a Bayit, right? A Bet is a house. We said Aleph is the word Aleph is to teach. That's what God does. But we can't, in this world, experience something that's 100% spiritual. So we have a house. We have something physical that can encompass, encase the spirituality. And these 2 extremes come together in the Gimel. Gimel is the balance between something that's completely spiritual and something that's completely physical, and that gives the Gimel, the balanced entity, the ability to gomel. The word Gimel is to do good unto others, to bestow goodness. And who does he bestow goodness to? He bestows goodness to the Dalet. The Dalet, we said, stands for Dal. Dal is somebody who's got, maybe that's where the English word D-U-L-L comes from, I'm not sure, but in Hebrew it means somebody who's poor, who hasn't got anything of his own. And somebody who hasn't got anything, he's the ultimate receiver, right? If you want to be able to receive something, you got to be empty. And so this combination of the Gimel giving to the Dal makes a new entity called the Hey. The Hey has got a Dalet in it, right? We see the Dalet in the letter Hey, and it's got the Yud, which is Hashem. In other words, is the result of this combination of this partnership, if you like, of the gomel and the dal, of the bestower and the giver. So that's the initial process of how goodness comes into this world, whether it's from person to person or whether it's in a spiritual way of looking at things through different worlds. The next group of letters are the 3 letters Vav, Zayin, Chet, and they're the process of how this affluence that is now in the world, how it spreads through the world. And it goes from looking first at the pure physical affluence, and that's the Vav. The Vav is the letter, the Vav is like a pipe. The shape is like a pipe. It also stands for the letter and, because it means in Hebrew and, because it connects things together. That's what a pipe does, that when you influence somebody else, the giver gets connected to the receiver, like the Gimel and the Dalet above, they get connected. And Vav, the number 6, the value of the letter Vav, are the 6 days of the week, which are the physical days of the week, or the 6 directions in this world, right? The 3 dimensions, which are 6 directions: north, east, west, south, up and down. That's the letter Vav. The letter Zayin is a Vav, same physical pipe, but with a little Yud on top. Okay, in other words, it's the combination of the spiritual and the physical in this world being spread together, and that's why the Zayin, the 7th day, is the Shabbat, right? It takes the 6th day and gives them, while still being connected to the 6th, it gives them a spiritual counterpart, a spiritual part. And according to the Maharal, it's the inner point. If you have the 6 directions, there's a 7th point in the middle that brings them all together. That's Hashem. When we go to Chet, we go completely beyond that. We go out of the physical world into the spiritual world. And that's why the Brit Milah, the bris, we do on the 8th day, because there we throw out nature. We say nature is not good enough, and we fix nature. We celebrate the Torah, which is something that's completely spiritual, on the 8th day of Sukkot with Simchat Torah, or on the 8th week after Pesach on Shavuot when we receive the Torah. So if you like, you can almost see this as a process that Aleph to Hey is the goodness coming down into this world, and Vav and Chet is spreading out into the world, but also slowly going up stage by stage till we, from down here, so to speak, reveal Hashem in the spiritual world as much as we can. And the final letter of the units, the 9th letter, is the Tet. And then we said the Tet is just a big number of disconnected units, and each one is a unique character in its own. This, on the one hand, it's not good that entities or people are not coordinated with each other. On the other hand, there is a certain stage where it's good initially to be like that, for each one to develop its own unique personality. And with that, we move on to the letters of the tens. The 10th letter is the Yud, and it has the numerical value 10, which is similar to the Tet, but now it brings them all together. Instead of having 9 random numbers, or not random, 9 different entities all in there doing their own thing, Yud now is one system where all these 10 come together. Yud is the minyan, okay? And we also said that now all the numbers that we're going to see moving on till the tzaddik, you know, which has the value of 90, because these letters now go up in tens, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, are parallel to the units. So the Yud symbolizes Hashem, and we said the Yud is small, like, because we don't really understand Hashem. So that's why it's a small letter. Our understanding of Hashem is small. And it's parallel to the Aleph, right, which was the 1, because both of them symbolize God, Elohim or Hashem. Kaf, on the other hand, is the vessel. Kaf is a kli, or a spoon in Hebrew. And this gives a physical place for the spiritual Yud to appear in this world. In other words, it's very similar to the bet. It even has a similar shape to the bet. If the bet was a bayit, a house, the kaf is a kli, which is a vessel. Similar functions, but now we're talking in the public realm. We moved on to the lamed. The lamed was the melamed, the teacher, lomed, and the lamed is the combination of the yud and the kaf, just like the gimel is the combination of the aleph and the bet, and that's why the lamed's got the value 30. And in order to be the ultimate, we said that the lamed, the teacher, is the ultimate bestower. In other words, when you bestow Torah, spirituality to somebody, you're bestowing far more than if you bestow just physicality. This is expressed in the very interesting halakha that maybe people wouldn't think is intrinsic, that we have to honor our parents and do everything for our parents. We also have to honor our teacher, our rabbi, and do everything for him. You have to do both. But what happens if there's a conflict between them? What happens if you only got a certain amount of money and both your teacher, your main teacher who's taught you all the spirituality that you have, and your parents need the help? Who do you give priority to? And interestingly enough, the halakha says you actually give priority to your teacher, not to your parents, because your teacher brought you into the spiritual world, and your parents brought you into the physical world. And that's the higher level that we're talking about now, the public realm. Of course, if your parents are your teachers, then you don't have a dilemma anymore. So that's the lamed, the teacher. We said the lamed is the tallest of the letters because he's got this power of this combination of the yud and the kaf. He's got a bird's eye view. He's a head above the other letters, and he can influence far more. Then we spoke about the letter mem. Mem is 40, and we said this stands for the processes of the world. Okay, and the mem is similar to the dalet. Okay, because the dalet was the receiver, the mem also is a type of receiver. But just as when we had the units, once we had the gimel and the dalet together, we had this team of a giver and a taker working together. We had a system, a process of giving and taking. And we said that mem, which stands for mayim, mem yud mem is also water. And the main physical process in the world that keeps the world alive is the water process of the water evaporating, turning into rain and coming down again. And this symbolizes all the processes in the world that God's affluence comes down, but not just comes down, but there's a mechanism to keep it dynamically moving to keep us, to give us the good. And finally, last week we learned about the nun. And we said nun stands for the fruitfulness. Nun is in Aramaic is a fish, and and the nun is like a vav with a base which can capture things. We also spoke about the nun sofi, which is the long nun that takes this goodness and goes on for eternity. That's eternity. So that's my attempt in a nutshell to cover everything that we learned in the last 13 shurim, and we move on to the Samech. The Samech, the word, as usual, we start with the 5 main qualities that appear in the letters, well, in most of the letters. Here, as in several of the letters, there's no, I haven't got anything to say about the sound of the Samech, and that's why I've shaded it out. I've also made it smaller to get the rest of the words onto the slide. So the word Samech means to support. Somech, ani somech alav. Okay, I trust him because he gives me support. Okay, and in fact, in the one of the sources, the midrash sources that we often bring, the otיות Rabbi Akiva, the drashot that Rabbi Akiva gave on the letters. Remember that Rabbi Akiva only started learning the letters at the age of 40. They gave him a disadvantage, but also gave him the advantage that when he learned them, he didn't just accept what is being told, but he questioned what each letter meant, and that's why we can learn all these things today from Rabbi Akiva and the likes. And Rabbi Akiva said the word somech can split it into 2 words. You can write samech mach. Oops, I'm not going to do that. In other words, somech mach. Who do you support? You support the person who's weak. Okay, it's very similar to the gomel dal that we mentioned before. And last week when I spoke about the nun, I said even though there's a lot of positive sides of the nun, in the psalm of Asher Shavitecha that we say 3 times a day in davening, the actual psalm starts afterwards. It starts from Arom Mimcha. It goes through all the letters of the alphabet with the exception of one letter, with the exception of the nun. Because the nun stands for falling, and this is a positive psalm, he doesn't want to talk about people falling, spiritually falling. But immediately afterwards, the next verse, after the nun, is Somech, the Samech, Somech Hashem et kol hanoflim. Okay? God supports all the noflim. So we remember the noflim, but the idea is that when somebody falls, we don't say that the aim of falling is falling. We don't say that falling is just a terrible thing. We say that falling is a means for growth. Every time that something negative happens to you, it's an opportunity to use this to move to a higher place than you were before. The verse says, we brought it last week in Tehillim, Sheva yipol tzaddik v'kam. A tzaddik is someone who falls 7 times. 7 is a symbol of all the time, right? Like this, again, the 7 days of the week. 7 is the number of things that happen in this world all the time. Tzaddik is a person who falls 7 times and gets up. He's not a person who never falls. And this is the idea of the Samech. The Samech, the letter Samech, symbolizes, the name says, I'm supporting you. So that's the name. We move on to the numerical value. And the numerical value is 60. So just like when we spoke about the units, that this is the physical perfection because 6 was physical perfection because you cover all the different directions in the world, or the 6 days of the week. So is the Samech covering on a higher level, on the spiritual, on the public level, the physical perfection. I just want to divert for a minute and something that I think we've said before, but I want to mention again, the difference between the units and the tenths. The difference between, if you talk about a prat, about an individual person, and about the klal. The more you go to talking about a group of people, the klal, and the bigger the klal, the bigger the amount of people in this group of people, the more spiritual you are. For example, if a person, all he does is worries about his own personal parnasah, about his own personal livelihood, he's being very physical. He's not being very spiritual. But if he takes the same efforts and works in the same jobs to find money, and the aim of this money is to support a group of people, whether it be a charity or even whether to support a town or a country, all of a sudden, that same physical support turns into something spiritual. And that's what we're saying now in all these 10 letters that represent the tens and they're parallel to the units, but that we're taking this now to a different level. We're taking it more to a more spiritual level just by the fact that we're going to the spiritual world. So that's the 60, that's physical perfection on a higher level. The Mishnah in Pikey Avot that I had to learn not so long ago when I had this birthday says Ben Shishim le Zikna. Okay, somebody who is 60 is Zakain. Okay, so those of us who are 60 may initially be insulted by this, but the truth is it's not. It's actually a compliment. The word Zakain in rabbinical literature is somebody that you respect because of his experience. Okay, and one of the drashot that the Gemara gives on the word Zakain is it stands for Zekana Chochma. Okay, the word Zakain has in it Ze, the Zayin is like this person. Ken, Kana, he bought Chochma, wisdom. So the difference is when we spoke about 40, the Mishnah says 40 is understanding. When you're 40, you understand, start bringing things together, how things start to connecting to each other. Bina means understanding one thing from another thing. When you're 50, you get to a higher level called Chochmah. Chochmah is understanding things, getting knowledge that you couldn't get before, getting revealed to you things that now you're on a high level, a more developed level, you can get things that you didn't have before. Shishim is even a higher level. Shishim is when you have the experience that allows you to use the Bina and Chochmah in a constructive way and build the next generation. Another point of 60 is protection. Okay, there's a pasuk that we actually say before we go to sleep as part of Kriyat Shema Lamita, and just after the Shema we say, Shishim Giborim b'mitato shel Shlomo. Right, the 60 heroes that are protecting the Shlomo's bed. So a person's bed is a place where he's exposed. This is a place where his body rests and develops and gets its strength. And the 60 is the protection. The shape of the Samech is a circle, right? This is the closest to the circle. And it's actually a vav that's been turned into a circle. So that's interesting because we said it's 60 and the vav was 6. But what is the meaning of the circle? So a circle is a very, very interesting shape in that, if any of you remember your maths from a long time ago, that if you take the point in the middle, the center of the circle, and you take a piece of string that's a fixed length, and you move it around, you'll get a circle. Because the circle influences all directions exactly the same amount. And that's the idea of this circle, the Samech, is Hashem protecting us from all directions. Or maybe he's protecting everybody, right? Not just us from all directions, but all people at the same time, according to what they need. Now, sometimes we see things in the world and we say, why did Hashem do this to us? Why has this happened? And our problem is that what we're looking at ourselves, but not at the whole world, because we're not capable of looking at the whole world. But very often we can look afterwards at an event and we say, this event was a terrible thing, but the long-term effect, or the effect, if I look on everything together with other people, was a very, very, very positive effect. one, maybe the example, and none of us knows, nobody understands the reason for the Holocaust and why so many people died and why Hashem did. We don't understand these ways. But what we do know, that as a direct result of the Holocaust, today we live in a miraculous country that provides strong physical and spiritual support to Am Yisrael, maybe like we never had before. Okay, in fact, there's probably more people learning Torah in Israel today than have learned Torah in any other era since the world was created. So clearly we don't understand why this person suffered and that person suffered, and we don't understand why it had to be like that. But Hashem, who got the capability of seeing the big picture and the capability of running systems that in the end everything is thought of, that's the way he's runs the world. And that's the idea of the Samech. In other words, no matter which direction you look, Hashem's taking it into account. A good example of this is a story mentioned in the Talmud, in the Gemara, about two people, two murderers. But there's a difference between them. One was a real murderer who murdered somebody intentionally and should have got the death sentence, but there were no witnesses and he got away with it. And the second was somebody who's called a shogeg, somebody who killed somebody else by mistake. You know, maybe he was careless. You know, maybe today, in a modern example, would be somebody who killed somebody in a road accident because he wasn't 100% paying attention to the road. He wasn't completely driving irresponsibly, but he lost attention for a few minutes, and God forbid a tragedy happened. And he also, this person, the punishment for a person like this in the times of the Gemara is that he doesn't get killed because he killed intentionally. On the other hand, something has to be done. And he goes to the Ir Miklat. He goes to the protected cities, a closed-off city where he goes and he lives there until the current Kohen Gadol, the high priest, passes away. And the idea is a few ideas. First of all, he's protected in case any of the family of the person who killed want to revenge him, and that they can't go into this city. But more important, these are the cities of the Levim. The Levim are the spiritual people in Am Yisrael, and there he learns that how to be more careful, how to do what he needs to do as somebody who was careless, and a tragedy happened as a result of his carelessness. But now we have two people, one who murdered intentionally, should have got the death sentence, but there were no witnesses. One who should go to the Ir Miklat, should go to the absorption town, but there were no witnesses. So what does Hashem do? Hashem brings them to the same pundak, the same little cafe or pub, and one of them, the one who killed by mistake, he climbs up a ladder to fetch something from a shelf. The other one happens to walk under the ladder exactly at the same time, and the ladder slips, and the ladder kills the person who killed on purpose. And now they're witnesses. So the person who climbed up the ladder and killed another person by mistake will now go to the Ir Miklat. And the reason why I've gone into this whole long story is it shows that when Hashem provides solutions, he doesn't just look for a solution for one person or just for a solution for another person. He looks for solutions that are all-encompassing. And that's the idea of the Samech. And that's why the Samech is Dafka Hashem's Hanaga. Hashem's running the world on the public level. That's why it's 60 and not 6. Because Hashem looks at everything in the world, and often when we say, why did Hashem do this? We're asking this question because we do not see the big picture. And that's why we have a bracha, right? When something good happens to us and we see that it's good, we say, Baruch Shechianu v'kimanu v'gianu lazman hazeh. We thank Hashem. But when something terrible happens to us, for example, somebody close passes away, we say the bracha, Baruch Dayan ha'emet. We thank God, who's the true judge. So first of all, we don't try to be abnormal. We don't say Shechianu when somebody dies. We are sad, and it's natural to be sad, and we don't try change that. On the other hand, even in our sadness, we realize that in spite of it, there's obviously a good reason why this tragedy happened to me. And therefore we say Dayan Ha'imet, first of all, it's a bracha, and we bless Hashem for it. And there's some happiness in a bracha. And we say, whatever the reason is, even though I don't understand it, in the big picture, it's definitely for the good. So that's the idea of the circle. The idea is same radius in all direction. Hashem protects us from all direction. His management, so to speak, of the world is complete and takes all the factors into account, really all the factors. Okay. Now, another thing is the Samech is a closed letter, and there's only one other letter that is closed, and that is the Mem Sofit, right? We spoke about the Mem 2 weeks ago, and if the Mem comes at the end of the letter, it's more of a square shape, but it's also closed. And in fact, the Gemara says that the 10 commandments were quite miraculous. They weren't just carved on the stone, but the letters went from one side to the other side. And when it came out the other side, it wasn't mirror writing. It should have been mirror writing. So you could read it from this side, or you could read it from this side, and you saw the 10 commandments. Now, this is okay for all the letters, except for the Samech and the Mem. Because if the Samech is carved through, how does the little piece of stone in the middle stand in the air? And the Gemara says that the Samech and the Mem in the 10 commandments were there by a miracle. Okay, and finally, the first word of the Torah that starts with the letter Samech is the word Sefer. Now, till now, all the letters that we've had till now, this first word have always been in the first chapter of Berashit. Note here that we're going all the way to chapter 5, okay, Berashit, hey, Aleph, before we get a letter with Sefer, with the Samech. So I think this tells us that this relates to the Zikna that we learned earlier, right? The idea of the Samech, somebody who understands that Hashem is everywhere, and even though things are bad, Hashem is there, is Dafka, the person who's a Zakain, okay? As you get older and as you get more experience, you can get more and more understanding. You got the hindsight, right? What they say in Yiddish, it's easy to be an Iber-Chochem, right? Now I understand what happened 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 59 years ago, in the 6 years of my life. All of a sudden, things get a perception, a perspective that they didn't have before. And that's, I think, the significance that this Samech comes so late. And the word is Sefer, right? What is a Sefer? A Sefer is a book. And a book, by its nature, has a lot of information in it. And if you look at each, you can look at a modern book, each page, although the books in ancient times were scrolls, like the Torah scroll, but again, there you have pages. When you look at each individual page, you're missing the big picture, right? If you take even a novel and you open it on page 58 and you read, and you don't know what this book's about, everything will be completely out of context. The value of the book is when you read it from page 1 to the last page. The value of the book is in the completeness. And that's what I think the Samech is. So the Samech is around its completeness. The Samech is something that we achieve when we're in the group realm. It's around that it affects all the different aspects of life. And it's like a Sefer that only after we see everything together, we can understand the way of Hashem's function. With this basis, we're going to go on to a couple other points about the Samech. Not many on the Samech I didn't find, so sure will be a little bit shorter than usual today. So first of all, the Gemara in Shabbat that talks about the children that gave the drashot on the letters, of the Samech it puts together with the Ayin that please God we'll see next week, and it says Somech en aniyim. Okay, the children actually give two different explanations. They say the word Ayin is an ani, is a poor person. So Hashem is Somech, he supports, the ani. Very similar to what Otiyot Rabbi Akiva said, that we said earlier, that Samech could be somech mach. Mach is also an ani. The other thing that the children in the Gemara gave the drasha was the Samech is simanim asa. God gives us signs, and gives simanim asa b'Torah, b'kaner. If you want to learn Torah, if you want to remember Torah, make all sorts of signs that you'll remember it. Make I know that Heather does this a lot when you teach Hebrew and you try to remember a word. This sounds like something you do, all sorts of tricks. That's a great thing. When you learn Torah, give whether it's gematrias, whether it's the shape of the letters, whether it's all other tricks, give signs. And I think this also relates, even though according to the Pshat, these children are talking about learning Torah, but it also says that what we actually experience in the world on a day-to-day basis, they're signs. And we remember the way the human mind works. Sometimes we remember things because we associate it with something else. But when we look back and when we get to the zikna, the shishim, we put all these signs together and we get the samach, we get the round global picture. Other things we saw from Otiyot Rabbi Akiva on the previous page, but two other things that Rabbi Akiva says there. He notices that in the book of Kohelet, I think it's Ecclesiastics, the last verse, that book of Kohelet goes through, it's a very philosophical book. And Shlomo HaMelech, who wrote the book, says this is good and this is bad. And sometimes he seems to contradict himself. Like being happy and laughing is a good thing and it's a bad thing. And basically the message of the book that the world is complex. And there's nothing's really good or bad, but everything's got a good or bad component to it. And right at the end of this, he comes to his conclusion. Now, Shlomo HaMelech could do this because Shlomo HaMelech was the wisest of all men. And also, even though he died at the age of 52, I think, he died with a lot of experience. He had a lot of wealth, he had a lot of women, and he had a lot of power. He had everything. And in the end, when he sums up all these experiences of life in what looks like a very confused book, Sof davar hakol nishma, et Elohim yishma ki ze kol adam. In the end, after I've heard everything, after I've read the whole book, after I've lived through my whole life, in the end of the day, I realize et Elohim tira, that what life is all about is actually fearing God. That actually, when we look at everything and we see what we said earlier, that retroactively that God is really managing things in a controlled fashion, you realize that from day one, that's the simple solution. Fear God, even if we don't understand Him completely. So that's why that samech, sof davar, is written with is a big samech in the Tanakh. The other thing that he says is that the samech is like a seed, like a core in the middle of something, and everything grows around. Okay, I wrote here a bracket, maybe like the atom, even though they didn't know the atom as we know today in the times of Shlomo, of Rabbi Akiva, but they had the idea, even in ancient Greek philosophers spoke that there's some smallest element of the world, and they called it the atom. Okay, and I think we even said when the very first session we had, when we spoke about the letters, that maybe the word ot, maybe the word atom comes from the word ot, because the letters are like the atom, the basic building block of the world. So what Rabbi Akiva says is that the samach symbolizes the central point, and then the whole world grows in all directions, and you get the world. And the symbol of this is Jerusalem. And the pasuk in Tehillim says, Yushalayim harim sabivla. You have Jerusalem and you have mountains all around it. Jerusalem is like a samach, and the mountains are like the black ink of the samach, giving it a round shape. And this tells us that Jerusalem is actually the center of the world. Because when Hashem created the world, He started with the stone that's in the Alaska Mosque, which is in the center of the temple, the Even Shtia, and then the world was built on that. But that's the spiritual center of the world. The first time the letter appears in the Torah at all, okay, what we said before, that the word Sefer is the first time the letter appears in the beginning of a word. But the first time the letter appears at all is only in the second chapter of Berashit, where Hashem brings, creates Eve. In other words, Adam is all alone. And as we said, Chazal say that Adam and Eve were actually two beings connected back to back, man and woman connected back to back. It talks about the rib. It's not actually a rib, but it's the half of the man-woman. And he separates them. And then he closes the wound so that they won't be disgusted with each other. They'll be attracted to each other. And now for the first time, man and woman can face each other face to face, not back to back. They can talk to each other. And the Targum, the Unculus, the translation that goes back to the Talmudic times of the Unculus in Aramaic, says that the wife is an Ezer Kenegdo, a helper against opposite the man. In fact, one of the drashot, they say, if you merit, your wife is a helper. And if you don't merit, she's Kenegdo, she's against you. But the truth is that actually both come together. So for someone to be a real help, a real complement to a person, they have to challenge him. They don't not just accept everything him or her say, but challenge him, and that's why they're completing. The translation is Samech, Somech Kekiblei. In other words, a support opposite him. Again, the same word Samech, that's the letter that we're talking about. And that is the idea of the woman who's encompassing the man and gives him his place and makes him complete when he gets married. Right? The Torah says, the Gemara says, that a single man or a single person are like half people. They're incomplete people. When they get married, they become complete. They become a circle. And maybe that's, I haven't seen this written, but when I saw this the other day, I thought maybe that's the idea of the minhag that some people have when they get married, that the wife comes up, the groom's in the chuppah, and the wife comes up and starts walking around him in circles and creating this circle around him, the samech around him. Although some people say the reason is because she's going to run circles around him for the rest of her life, but I think this is the a more accurate reason. Okay, Simanim Lelimud Torah is actually a repetition of what's written above. I'm actually going to delete it because it's a repetition. And the negative samech, just like we spoke with the nun, that nun's got a positive side, but nun's also got a negative side. The samech also has a negative aspect, and that's the yetzer hara, the evil inclination. Because the evil inclination that tries to make us do bad things also comes to us from all the directions. And some people actually say that the Latin English letter of S that is used for snake, although we don't normally make drashot on these letters, actually is it's the same sound as the samech, and the snake is the symbol of the yetzer hara. So ze keneged ze asa Hashem. That's one of the principles, that as great as something is, there'll also be a negative force, so that we always have this balance in this world, and we have free choice. So I'm going to quickly sum up what we learned with the 5 main tchunot, that the samech, the idea of samech, is getting the support of Hashem in a balanced way, in a complete way, in all the different directions, and that's why it's 60, and that's why we only appreciate it when we reach the age of 60, when we have our experience, and that's why the first time this letter appears in the beginning of a word in the Torah is a sefer that you can only appreciate once you finish the sefer, once you've got the complete picture, and that's the circle that we have. Any questions before I turn off the recording?